Truman Capote, writer of In Cold Blood, notes in his first chapter that 4 shotgun blasts ended 6 human lives. He is referring to the shooting deaths of the 4 Clutter family members and to their killers, Smith and Hickok, who were executed by hanging for the Clutter murders. These brutal deaths affected the townspeople and the friends and family of the victims. Because Kendall and Nancy Clutter were only 15 and 17 at the time of the murders, you can just imagine how tragic the loss was for the friends of the children. Nancy's best friend, Susan Kidwell, and her boyfriend, Bobby Rupp, were devastated after the murders. In the scene I have chosen to read, Susan talks about the loss of her best friend. We were like sisters. At least, that's how I felt about her. As though she were my sister. I couldn't go to school. Not those first few days. I stayed out of school until after the funeral. So did Bobby Rupp. For a while, Bobby and I were always together. He's a nice boy. He has a good heart. But nothing very terrible had ever happened to him before. Like losing anyone he loved. And then, on top of it, having to take a lie detector test. I don't mean he was bitter about it. He realized the police were doing what they had to do. Some hard things, 2 or 3, had already happened to me. But not to him. So it was a shock when he found out that maybe life isn't one big long basketball game. Mostly, we drove around in his old Ford. Up and down the highway, out to the airport and back. Or we'd go to the Creamy. That's the drive-in. And sit in the car, order a Coke, listen to the radio. The radio was always playing. We didn't have anything to say to ourselves. Except, once in a while, Bobby said how much he had loved Nancy, and how he could never care about another girl. Well, I was sure Nancy wouldn't have wanted that, and I told him so. I remember, I think it was a Monday. We drove down to the river. We parked on the bridge. You can see the house from there. The Clutter house. And part of the land. Mr. Clutter's fruit orchard, and the wheat fields going away. Way off on one of the fields there was a bonfire burning. They were burning stuff from the house. Everywhere you looked, there was something to remind you. Men with nets and poles were fishing along the banks of the river, but not fishing for fish. Bobby said they were looking for weapons. The knife, the gun. Nancy loved the river. Summer nights, we used to ride double on Nancy's horse, Babe, that old fat gray, right straight to the river and right into the water. Then Babe would wait along the shallow part while we played our flutes and sang. Got cool. I kept wondering, gosh, what will become of her? Babe. A lady from Garden City took Kenyon's dog. She took Teddy. He ran away and found his way back to Holcomb. But she came back and got him again. And I have Nancy's cat, Edenrude. But Babe, suppose they'll sell her. Nancy would hate that. Wouldn't she be furious? Another day, the day before the funeral, Bobby and I were sitting by the railroad tracks, watching the trains go by, real stupid, like sheep in a blizzard. When suddenly Bobby woke up and said, "We ought to go see Nancy. We ought to go be with her." So we drove to Garden City. Went to the Phillips Funeral Home there on Main Street. I think Bobby's kid brother was with us. Yeah, that sounds right. He was with us. Because I remember we picked him up after school. And I remember he said how there wasn't going to be any school the next day, so all the Holcomb kids could go to the funeral. And he kept telling us what the kids thought. He said the kids were convinced it was the work of a hired killer. I didn't want to hear about it, just gossip and talk. Nancy would despise this. Anyway, I don't much care who did it. Somehow it seems besides the point. My friend is gone. Knowing who killed her is not going to bring her back. What else matters? They wouldn't let us. At the funeral parlor, I meant. They said no one could view the family. Except the relatives. But Bobby insisted, and finally the undertaker, he knew Bobby, and I guess felt sorry for him. He said, "All right, but be quiet about it. Come on in." Now I wish we hadn't. The 4 coffins, which quite filled the small, flower-crowded parlor, were to be sealed at the funeral services. Very understandably, for despite the care taken with the appearance of the victims, the effect achieved was quite disheartening. Nancy wore her dress of cherry red velvet, her brother a bright plaid shirt. The parents were more sedately attired. Mr. Clutter in a navy blue flannel, and his wife in a navy blue crepe. And it was this, especially this, that lent the scene an awful aura. The head of each was completely encased, a swollen cocoon twice the size of an ordinary blow-up balloon. And the cotton, because it had been sprayed with a glossy substance, twinkled like Christmas tree snow. I went outside and waited in the car. Across the street, a man was raking leaves. I kept looking at him because I didn't want to close my eyes. I thought, if I do, I'll faint. So I watched him. I watched him rake leaves and burn them. Watched, without really seeing him. Because all I could see was the dress. I knew it so well. I helped her pick out the material. It was her own design, and she sewed it herself. I remember how excited she was the first time she wore it. At a party. All I could see was Nancy's red velvet. And Nancy in it. Dancing.